The paper tore in half before it even touched the floor. A classroom full of children watched in silence as a proud little boy stood frozen at the front of the room, his science project destroyed in seconds. His hands trembled, not because he had failed, but because no one believed him. His teacher's voice carried across the classroom, sharp and certain, insisting that his father could not possibly be what he claimed. The other children laughed. The boy didn't, and then the classroom door opened. What happened next would not only silence the room, it would expose something much deeper than doubt. It would reveal how quickly people judge, how easily they dismiss, and how wrong they can be. Before we continue, make sure you like, share, comment, and subscribe to Black Voice Story for more powerful, true inspired stories. Malik Thompson was 9 years old, soft-spoken, observant, and wiser than most children his age. He attended Jefferson Ridge Elementary, a well-funded public school in a suburban district where most of the families were white, affluent, and deeply connected to one another. Malik and his mother had moved into the district just 2 years earlier after his father was reassigned to a military base nearby. Malik stood out immediately, not just because he was one of the only black children in his grade, but because of how he carried himself. He was polite. He kept his uniform neat. He finished assignments early and rarely caused disruptions. But there was something else, too, a quiet pride, the kind that came from knowing your family stood for something bigger than yourself. His father, General Marcus Thompson, had built a career in the United States Army over nearly 3 decades. He had served overseas multiple times. He had commanded troops in high-risk operations. He had earned medals that most soldiers only read about in textbooks. Recently, he had been promoted to the rank of 4-star general, a distinction so rare that fewer than 50 active duty officers held it at any given time. But inside the walls of Jefferson Ridge Elementary, none of that seemed to matter. Malik didn't talk much about his father's position. His parents had taught him humility. At home, General Thompson was simply Dad. He helped with homework when he could. He called every night when deployed. He attended parent-teacher conferences in uniform only when necessary. This particular week was Career Week at school. Students were asked to prepare short presentations about what their parents did for a living. Some children came dressed as doctors, lawyers, or business owners. One girl brought a stethoscope. A boy carried a briefcase that belonged to his father, a corporate executive. Malik had spent days preparing. He created a poster board carefully decorated with printed photos. One showed his father in full dress uniform. Another displayed a ceremony where he stood beside high-ranking officials. Malik included a printed fact sheet explaining what a 4-star general was and how rare the rank truly was. He didn't brag. He simply wanted to share. But his teacher, Ms. Karen Whitfield, had already formed an opinion. Ms. Whitfield prided herself on structure and order. She had taught at Jefferson Ridge for 15 years and was known for maintaining a disciplined classroom environment. Parents describe her as firm but fair. Yet fairness can sometimes bend under the weight of assumptions. When Malik walked to the front of the classroom holding his poster board, Ms. Whitfield initially smiled. But that smile faded as she examined the images. She stared at the photograph of General Thompson in full uniform. Her brow tightened. She looked at Malik, then back at the photo. The other students leaned forward, curious. Malik began explaining his father's role, describing leadership, responsibility, and service. He spoke softly but clearly. He described how his father oversaw thousands of soldiers and made decisions that impacted lives. Ms. Whitfield interrupted. She asked how Malik's father could possibly be a 4-star general. She pointed out that generals were extremely rare. She said perhaps Malik misunderstood his father's rank. Malik shook his head gently. He insisted he wasn't mistaken. The room began to shift. Some students giggled. One boy whispered something about lying. Ms. Whitfield asked Malik to bring the poster closer. She inspected it as if searching for a proof of fabrication. The image of General Thompson standing beside national leaders seemed to irritate her rather than impress. She asked whether Malik's father was perhaps a recruiter or maybe worked in an office. Malik felt heat rise to his cheeks. He knew what his father did. He had attended the promotion ceremony. He had watched his mother cry proud tears as 4 stars were pinned onto his father's shoulders. He wasn't confused, but doubt, when spoken loudly enough, begins to sound like truth to everyone else in the room. And Ms. Whitfield spoke very loudly. What began as skepticism quickly turned into public humiliation. Ms. Whitfield told Malik that honesty was important. She said exaggerating a parent's job might impress classmates temporarily, but would only cause embarrassment later. Her tone was not curious. It was corrective. Malik felt every pair of eyes on him. He tried to explain again. He described attending a ceremony on base. He described salutes and speeches. He described the way other soldiers addressed his father. But the more he explained, the more Ms. Whitfield seemed convinced he was inventing details. She picked up the printed fact sheet and questioned its authenticity. She implied that internet printouts could be misleading. She suggested that perhaps Malik's father admired generals but was not one himself. The laughter grew louder. One student muttered that generals didn't have kids in regular schools. Another whispered that someone would have heard about it if it were true. Malik's chest tightened. Children can sense when authority shifts against someone, and once that shift happens, cruelty often follows. Ms. Whitfield finally made a decision. She announced that the presentation would be paused until Malik could provide verifiable proof from the school administration. She removed the poster board from his hands, and in a moment of visible frustration, she tore the printed fact sheet in half. The sound was sharp. It echoed. Malik's world seemed to shrink into that tearing sound. He stood there, hands empty, eyes burning, but he did not cry. He refused to cry in front of them. Ms. Whitfield moved on to the next student as if nothing significant had occurred. But something had. Malik's classmates carried the story into recess. They repeated it at lunch. By the end of the day, the phrase fake general followed him down the hallway. When Malik arrived home, his mother noticed immediately that something was wrong. He was quieter than usual. His shoulders slumped. At first, he said nothing, but children can only carry humiliation for so long before it spills out. That evening, he told his parents everything. General Marcus Thompson listened without interrupting. His jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. He asked careful questions. He clarified details. He made sure he understood exactly what had happened. His wife watched him closely. She knew that look in his eyes. It wasn't anger alone. It was something deeper, controlled, measured. The next morning, General Thompson made a decision. He would not call the school. He would not send an email. He would walk in, not to intimidate, not to threaten, but to correct. And when he chose to appear, he would appear fully. Career week continued the next morning. Ms. Whitfield began class as usual, unaware that events were already in motion. At precisely 10:17 a.m., the classroom door opened. The first thing the students noticed was a uniform. Deep blue, perfectly pressed. Rows of medals reflecting the fluorescent light. And on each shoulder, 4 silver stars. Behind him stood the school principal, pale and visibly nervous. General Marcus Thompson entered the room with calm authority. Not rushed, not aggressive, just present. The laughter that once filled the room vanished instantly. Children who had giggled the day before now sat upright, eyes wide. Ms. Whitfield froze. She stared at the insignia. 4 stars. Not printed on paper. Not downloaded from the internet. Embroidered onto a uniform worn by a man who carried decades of service in his posture alone. General Thompson did not raise his voice. He introduced himself formally. He explained his position within the United States Army. He spoke about leadership, sacrifice, and responsibility. He described the importance of integrity, especially in educational environments where children learn what fairness means. He never mentioned humiliation directly. He didn't have to. The principal shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Whitfield's face drained of color as realization settled in. Every assumption she had made now stood exposed in front of her students. The room felt heavy with awareness. General Thompson turned toward his son, who sat silently at his desk. He acknowledged Malik's courage for standing by the truth even when doubted, and then he addressed the class. He explained how rare 4-star generals were. He confirmed the statistics. He clarified that leadership comes in many forms, and it does not always look the way people expect. No one laughed this time. When he finished, he thanked the school for the opportunity to support Career Week and exited as calmly as he entered. But the impact lingered. The story did not end at 10:17 a.m. Within hours, district administrators were involved. Parents began calling the school. Some expressed outrage. Others demanded training sessions on bias and cultural awareness. Ms. Whitfield was placed on administrative leave pending review. Jefferson Ridge Elementary implemented new diversity and inclusion workshops. Career Week guidelines were rewritten to ensure that no child's presentation would be dismissed without proper verification, handled respectfully and privately. Malik returned to school the following week differently. Not arrogant, not vindictive, just steadier. The whispers stopped. Students who once laughed now asked questions, genuine ones, about the military, about leadership, about service. Malik completed his presentation. This time, no one interrupted. The lesson extended far beyond one classroom. It became a reminder that doubt often disguises bias. That authority must be exercised carefully, and that children watch how adults handle truth, especially when that truth challenges their expectations. Years later, some of those students would remember that day vividly, not because of embarrassment, but because it changed how they saw the world. They learned that assumptions can humiliate. They learned that dignity requires courage. And they learned that sometimes the quietest child in the room carries a legacy far greater than anyone imagines. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Black Voice Story for more powerful stories that deserve to be told.